My name is Lindsay Meiman, Lindsay Meiman, and I am the U.S. Communications Manager for 350 Action.
Cool. If you just, before we start, probably if you just explain briefly what 350 Action do and who they're affiliated to.
Yeah, absolutely. 350 Action is the sister organization of 350.org. 350 Action here in the U.S. does our electoral work, so engages in U.S. elections, endorsing candidates, and making sure that climate is a big issue in elections.
Do you think that it was a big election, this election?
Absolutely. You know, The Guardian and Vice came out with a poll that 7 in 10 voters want bold action from the next administration. And so that was a really decisive and really clear issue in this election. We also saw Joe Biden and Kamala Harris talking about climate, and increasingly, especially towards, the few days in the lead up to the election, climate was a top issue to show that, and that really proves that it's an issue that is really close to the hearts and minds of people across America.
Right. And was that evenly shared across all demographics and age groups, or was there some particular patterns there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know that it's Black, Indigenous, and communities of color that are hit first and worst by climate disaster. And we also know that this election and so much of the defense of our democracy was by Black women, Native voters, new immigrant voters who really made our voices heard and who, turned out to the polls in unprecedented numbers to vote for a future that actually works for people. So we do know, the exit polls are still coming through as counting still continues in many places. But we do know that there are pathways now to tackle, the issues and the crises that are at our doorsteps at the scale that science and justice require.
Yeah. So obviously we know that now Biden has won the election. At least that's what everyone, apart from some people, refuse to accept. So I think we can easily we will assume that Biden takes office on the 21st of November alongside Kamala Harris as vice president. So what? There's obviously some unanswered things we don't know yet. We don't know about the Senate runoffs on the 5th of January, which will obviously have a huge impact on actually whether Democrats control the Senate or not. But what does the election of Biden and Harris mean for climate action?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we, in the lead up to Joe Biden's inauguration, which is Wednesday, January 20th, 2021, we are continuing to push hard for their climate commitments to become reality and then for them to take action on day one and in the first 100 days. We know that the climate crisis, along with COVID-19, racial injustice, and economic injustice, tackling those things are Biden and Harris's priorities. And we also know that in tackling the climate crisis, we can also, create millions of jobs. So in terms of what the election of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris means for tackling the climate crisis, it means that we now have clear pathways and avenues to act at the scale that is required and transition off fossil fuels.
So obviously we can talk about, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of debates about that, how serious and ambitious Biden Harris should go in. Mm-hmm. But obviously, I just wonder if it's worth reflecting on just how much there's a stake this election. How much there is between just any kind of moderate action by Biden Harris, or actually not just doing anything worse or easing regulation stuff to actually what could have been a play if we had another 4 years of Trump.
Yeah, we know how much is at stake, and we know that this is our collective future we're talking about. Biden and Harris have a clear mandate to, act immediately to tackle the climate crisis. They've already committed to stop fossil fuel subsidies, to immediately rejoin the Paris Agreement, to stop fossil fuel extraction on public lands. And in the final presidential debate, we also saw Joe Biden recommit to transition off fossil fuels. We know that companies like Exxon and Shell, even as they lay off thousands of workers, while their executives rake in profits, we know that the Trump administration has spent the last 4 years propping up this failing and flailing industry. The first thing that we need to do is return land back to Indigenous peoples toward a just recovery. And we need to, as we transition off fossil fuels, make sure that the pension funds of current fossil fuel workers are fully funded. These pension funds aren't being funded. Meanwhile, executives are raking in bonuses. So we have an actual responsibility and opportunity for real care and repair now, and to actually heal as a country.
Yeah, good point. And if you talk about climate activists and you talk about the huge stake there was in this election, what role do you think they played in getting Biden Harris elected?
Mm-hmm. Let's not forget, Joe Biden didn't come into this presidential race with a strong climate plan. The movement and people across America made our voices heard, and we made that happen. So we've seen that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will listen to the people. We know that this election, we proved that voters choose our leaders. Leaders don't get to choose their voters. And so the voters have made our voices heard. We made this happen. I mentioned all of the things that the Biden administration has already committed to do to tackle the climate crisis. We know there's much further to go. We know that we need to stop fracking. We know that that is a bridge to nowhere. We know that we need to invest in frontline communities, invest in Black and Indigenous and communities of color that are already experiencing year-round climate disasters, from fires and floods and hurricanes, and that we have this opportunity now to make sure, we have the responsibility now to make sure that as Biden and Harris listen to the voices of the American people throughout their campaign, that they listen to the demands of our growing movement in the months and years to come.
There's a few states that was tipping the election, and that was like just maybe not the states we thought will happen, like states like Pennsylvania, Georgia, Wisconsin, stuff like that. And that was obviously only, it was a couple of days after the election we were sitting and waiting for the results to come in for those. So I just wonder if the climate change at stake in those states, I'm thinking particularly Pennsylvania and Georgia, and at the same time, the diverse communities and the communities you mentioned that has been kind of struggling and fighting against the fossil fuel industry. Do you think that had an impact in tipping it?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think, are experiencing the 28th named storm of the Atlantic and Gulf hurricane season, which breaks the records of the amount of strong named storms in places like Georgia. Early, in the lead up to Election Day, 3 million people lost power in the southeast of the US. And we really saw these climate disasters actually, impact polling places. In Louisiana, Hurricane Zeta impacted the polling places, particularly of Black communities, the same communities who, are being impacted by the pollution of oil refineries in the communities. And so, especially in Georgia, voter suppression was rampant, and we didn't let that, folks didn't let that stop turnout. We know that Black women made their voices heard in Georgia, and made that be a huge reason why like 91% of Black women voted for Joe Biden. in the US. In Pennsylvania, Trump had a last ditch effort to try to, claim that he was protecting fracking jobs. Meanwhile, fossil fuel jobs make up less than 1% of jobs in Pennsylvania. And multiple polls have showed that Pennsylvanians do want to phase out off of fossil fuels. And so, we've really seen young people, new immigrant voters, and native voters in places like Arizona really turn out in the face of voter suppression, in the face of climate disaster, to make sure that we can secure a livable future for all.
Yeah, I guess it's a fair assessment to say that actually Biden-Harris won despite of voter suppression, and it wasn't if you look at the popular vote, it wasn't that marginal as probably many media outlets would let you out to believe it was on a knife edge, And what you said about the fossil fuel industry, and it was remarkable, I think, so in the last debate where Biden said he wanted a transition away from the fossil fuel industry, where almost Trump tried to rally the states that's heavily reliant on fossil fuel, like Texas and other states. So, and that kind of comes on to my next point in terms of actually, are you worried about if you talk about COVID-19, the anti-science misinformation agenda being pushed by not only Trump, but obviously by his supporters, and how it just filters through on social media channels.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is a huge and important question that we need to continue to ask ourselves. The US remains a deeply divided country. Far too many people still voted for hate, frankly. And we know that this election has come in this moment of racial reckoning in the country. The United States must reckon with its founding in this moment as a nation built on stolen indigenous land by stolen African slaves. And instead of continuing on this path and story of deception that fossil fuel companies, this is their PR 101, is to make everyone think that they're responsible and so no one is responsible. Well, really, there are a few wealthy, mostly white men who profit off of this hate. And instead of giving the people resources, they have fed people hate. And so now is our moment to truly tackle these systems of colonialism, of capitalism, and embark on a time for healing, repair, and just recovery. So the work to strengthen our robust democracy does not end now. This is really our moment to go on the offense.
Yeah, I think, yeah, you touched on good things then, and obviously it was fueled in hate, but I think it was probably also fueled in fear. It was fueled in fear that everyone who works in the fossil fuel industry, they've been told that that job is going to go, and where I believe what Biden wanted to pursue, is not like you can leave the industry and find other opportunities elsewhere.
Mm.
So that's like when he rallied against Texas, he conveniently forgot to tell that how fast the wind industry has grown in Texas, and how many people it employs, and actually many fossil fuel kind of stormers, as he used wind power kind of to power themselves quite ironically. So in terms of how that's just transition, how do we transition? So how do we actually envision that message to people who are working in the industry and get them over to, if you like, the good side?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. Well, I think, ending fossil fuel subsidies is a great place to start, where let's not give billions of dollars in handouts to an industry that's not only hell-bent on our disruption, but also is laying off its workers. Let's actually make sure that those workers are supported in this transition. This is already happening at the local and state level, where communities are committing to the vision of a Green New Deal. And it looks different depending on the place, but the vision of that is to create millions of good union jobs as we prioritize the resilience and safety of our communities in the face of growing climate disaster, in the face of global pandemic, unemployment, all these very real things that we're being faced with, these compound crises. This is an opportunity to really embark on building a world and a country that works for people instead of corporations. And so that's very much the moment that we're in.
So we all know that come the inauguration on the 20th Jan, we don't quite yet know what happened to the Senate, but it looked like an uphill task for the Democrats to hold it. So we know that Biden will enroll the US back into the Paris straight away. I know there's too many to mention, all of them, but what are some easy, quick wins that he can put in practice without actually needing the Senate?
Yeah, this is a great question. And there's actually so much that Biden can do on day one in the first 100 days of his presidency that are totally within the realm of executive action and would be absolutely appropriate and necessary for him to take on day one. So at climatepresident.org, there are 10 things that Biden can do on day one or within the first 10 days to uh, be a climate president. That we know that's what we need. This includes keeping fossil fuels in the ground, immediately rescinding the permits for the Keystone XL pipeline. It's time that we kill that zombie pipeline once and for all. We don't want it. We don't need it. Um, he can hold fossil fuel companies accountable and actually launch into making polluters pay, stopping these handouts to the fossil fuel industry and instead supporting communities on the front lines, shifting finance flows away from fossil fuels. And we already know, yes, he's committed to rejoin the Paris Agreement, but there are really clear things he can do to secure that and go beyond. Yes. So I
No,
have.
I was just that was relating to Paris, and I just on diplomacy level, in terms of actually, Trump has done his best in 4 years to actually disassociate himself from actually, if you like to put away, allies from the US. So are people that US have before be able to collaborate with on climate issues. So what do you think he needs to do, Trump, to kind of establish? Because we know climate is a global problem. It can't be. It crosses borders. There's no wall that stops climate change. So what kind of partnership could Biden or should Biden set up with other people, other countries around the world who have the same interest in tackling the climate crisis?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, well, firstly, he can stop the Keystone XL pipeline. That is something that Canadians are fighting. That Indigenous peoples across North America, across Turtle Island, are fighting to stop that pipeline. So we can start at home and stop these fossil fuel companies, stop the fossil fuel projects, and actually, be a model for what climate action means by starting at home. In terms of the partnerships, that's absolutely crucial. We need to make sure that as the second largest or the largest ever historical emitter, the United States is partnering with countries and communities across the globe to stop fossil fuels and transition to renewable energy. And those partnerships will be extremely crucial, including, that global diplomacy. We know that there is a growing collective movement of a fossil fuel resistance around the world. And people are demanding that elected officials in countries everywhere, also call on Biden to be a real climate leader and understand that the US as a country, as well as many fossil fuel companies that are American companies, have caused destruction in other parts of the world. So in us figuring out what true care and repair looks like, what might it look like for fossil fuel companies that are American based to pay for their destruction globally. These are conversations that we need to be having. So in addition to the partnerships, there's also reckoning with the responsibility that US colonialism and capitalism have reaped on countries around the world, as it is a global issue.
do you have a wish list for what you like a Biden administration to look like? If you, but there's too many issues to mention, but we know if you just focus on the climate issue and climate energy transition issue, do you have some people you would really like to see be involved in a Biden administration?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think just in terms of values, first thing, like no one with fossil fuel ties, no one with any ties to the fossil fuel industry. And if they do have fossil fuel ties, then they need to cut them immediately. I think the second thing is having native representation. There's a lot of conversation around Deb Haaland as uh, Department of Interior, land management being under, native sovereignty and native purview makes a lot of sense. And then the last thing I would say is folks with an environmental justice lens. We need to be prioritizing the communities that are on the front lines and the fence lines of climate disaster, Black, Indigenous workers and communities of color, and poor white folks as well, who we have an environmental justice lens. Mustafa Santiago Ali is someone who is really strong environmental justice expert and advocate. So just making sure that we are absolutely saying no to fossil fuel ties, but also prioritizing folks who have a real vision of what an equitable America could look like.
Between now and up to the Senate runoff elections, is that a field that you are engaged in and working on, and what can anyone in America or outside America do who's really to help, who's really concerned about that?
That's a great question, and I can make sure to send some follow-up resources. 350 Action is absolutely involved and interested in protecting, honoring, and getting out the vote in Georgia, making sure that every vote is counted and that democracy is protected. You can go to 350 Action, 350action.org to learn more. And we are definitely sharing resources on Twitter and Facebook from key partners on the ground in Georgia.
Great. It's been a really fascinating conversation. Do you have anything you just want to mention that you think we haven't really covered so far?
I think we've touched on a lot of it. I think continuing to have the global conversation, as we sort of get, are no longer on the defense, no longer necessarily fighting an administration that, I'm not even using hyperbole, but is trying to kill us all. That we are really shifting gears into this moment of processing the trauma of the last 4 years and moving into a huge opportunity. We have this moment to feel hopeful, but this is not the time to be complacent. This is the time to go as hard as we can to defend our democracies, to protect our communities, and to make sure that we're building a world where all of us are healthy and safe.